So let's go ahead and jump right into our overview of the Fall 1 submission. And here we will provide general and background information related to the student profile and Fall 1 data population, and we'll introduce key concepts related to the data submission. All right. CalPADS operates much like a student information system. Once a student enrolls in an LEA, whether that be a district or a school, the student records must be maintained. Student information systems are designed to meet school needs, while CalPADS has been designed to meet state and federal reporting requirements. This slide shows a flow chart illustrating the data lifecycle for data in CalPADS. And we begin on the far left-hand side with the Student Information System, or SIS, where LEAs continually maintain student data at the local level. The majority of LEAs use batch file submission, in which you will extract this data from the local SIS and submit the extracted batch file to CalPADS in order to get the data into the CalPADS system. In order to meet reporting requirements while preserving and protecting the personal nature of student data, each student must be assigned a statewide student identification number, or SSID. And once the SSID is obtained, a student's enrollment and associated data can be reported and tied to the student in CalPADS. And this process of obtaining SSIDs and reporting student information is called SSID enrollment. And just a few weeks ago, we did do a couple of live training sessions on the SSID request and enrollment process, and we should have recordings of those trainings up on the CSIS YouTube training channel shortly. Above the SIS, we see the Special Education Data System, or the SEDS, which houses data and information on special education meetings, plans, statuses, and services. Data on students with disabilities is transferred to CalPADS directly via the Application Programming Interface, or API, with no action needed on the part of CalPADS coordinators to submit these records. CalPADS coordinators will, however, need to resolve any validation errors that arise in CalPADS from the said submission. Once the data arrives in CalPADS, it will be subject to input validation rules, or IVRs. If the submission triggers fatal IVRs, the files will be rejected, and you're required to resolve those IVRs and resubmit the files. If it triggers warning IVRs, you should do your due diligence and resolve these errors as well, though they did not prevent the files from being posted or the data from entering into the CalPADS system. And once the data is in the CalPADS system, it will be subject to certification validation rules, or CVRs, as well as certified data discrepancies, or CDDs. And these are essentially completeness and reasonability checks. CVR errors and CDDs arise when the data is already in the system, but must be resolved before you're able to review reports and certify your data in CalPADS. And while the data is housed in CalPADS, it's sent to other sources in line with reporting purposes, such as TOMS for assessment purposes, and the California Department of Social Services, or CDSS, database for the direct certification of foster youth. In Fall 1, you will submit the student profile records. Student profile records include the student enrollment, or SENR, student information, or SINF, student English language acquisition, or SELA, student programs, or SPRG, as well as the special education record types, including the meetings, or MEET file, the students with disabilities status, or SWDS file, the plan file, and the services, or SERV file. And these 4 file types were introduced last academic year with the special education redesign. The SENR, SINF, SELA, and SPRG records are extracted from the local SIS and submitted via batch file to CalPADS, or submitted to CalPADS directly in online maintenance. The 4 special education file types will be submitted from your SEDS system to CalPADS via the API, with no action needed on your part other than correcting errors and validating the completeness and reasonability of reports that draw information from these file types. The 8 files required for Fall 1 comprise the student profile. The SENR file type comes first and is highlighted as a centerpiece to the student profile on this slide. The SENR file establishes LEA ownership of the student in CalPADS. Once you submit the SENR and have ownership of student records, you can go on to submit the other file types that are required for Fall 1. The SINF, SELA, and SPRG records are again extracted from the local SIS and uploaded to CALPADS or otherwise uploaded individually in online maintenance. The MEET, SWDS, PLAN, and SERV file types for students with disabilities are transferred directly to CALPADS via the API from the special education data system. And these are systems like SACE, CIRRUS, and Welligent. This API transfer is an automated process and occurs nightly. The student profile data submission, that's the basis for Fall 1, is the building block for the rest of the data reporting requirements throughout the year in CALPADS. Student profile records determine the services and course enrollments in Fall 2, CTE participation in end of year 1, program participation in end of year 2, exemptions and expectations for absence and attendance in end of year 3, as well as the students with disabilities data reported in end of year 4. And these are just a few of the examples of how record types initially submitted during the Fall 1 data collection are relevant to or determine the data in future submissions throughout the year. Based on the file types collected and the information contained in those file types, these are the departments involved in each of the submissions. And in Fall 1, registrars, counselors, and principals are involved, as well as English Learner Services staff, National School Lunch Program staff, special education staff, and SELPA directors. And because of this, we recommend that you build strong relationships with the relevant staff in these departments. And this kind of coalition building is a key competency and indicator for success in CALPADS submissions. Student data changes frequently and should be updated in CALPADS on an ongoing basis. Keeping in student enrollment, demographic, and program eligibility data current in CALPADS has the following benefits for your LEA. Keeping your data current makes it easier to select the correct SSIDs for transferring students. Keeping your data current ensures that LEAs have access to current data, helping the LEAs to place new students in appropriate programs. Keeping your data current minimizes the LEA workload during snapshot collection windows. And keeping your data current ensures that the CALPADS ODS is up to date for assessment, state matching, and accountability purposes. Ongoing maintenance has the added benefit of ease of use in decision making and allows for the most accurate real-time data to be used in decision making. And given these benefits of ongoing maintenance, I want to ask, please answer in chat here, how frequently should student data be maintained in CALPADS? So please do put your answers in chat. We want to get some interaction from the audience here. We've got few folks saying weekly, ongoing, as frequently as humanly possible. I like that answer, Kelly. I maintain it daily, no more than 14 days. Those are all great answers. We recommend ongoing and consistent maintenance of records in CALPADS, but what that ongoing and consistent records maintenance looks like will depend on quite a few local factors. So ongoing and consistent maintenance could mean daily, weekly, no more than 14 days. All of these answers could represent that ongoing and consistent maintenance, but it depends on local factors that impact the frequency of records maintenance in CALPADS. And the first factor impacting frequency of CALPADS records maintenance is local enrollment procedures. You'll have to manage expectations and competing responsibilities with a level of support and collaboration. While reporting data in CALPADS is a priority, there are other duties and tasks at your LEA that must be done, and time and expectations will have to be managed and prioritized. And this will have an impact on how often CALPADS records are maintained, but should be managed in a way so as to not hinder CALPADS reporting and certification of a given data submission. The second factor impacting frequency of records maintenance in CALPADS is local reporting needs. SSIDs for LPAC and CASP, pre-ID, direct certification, and foster youth matching, as well as special education services. You'll need to report these locally, and we'll be submitting and maintaining records in CALPADS to enable the use and reporting of these services. And the third factor that impacts the frequency of CALPADS records maintenance is assessments and TOMS. Although these three umbrellas will impact frequency of records maintenance in CALPADS, CALPADS data should be submitted, posted, reviewed, and certified with awareness or mindfulness of CALPADS reporting deadlines, milestones, and the submission timeline. All right. LEA should be aware that there are excellent reference documents available to download for guidance on different aspects of CalPADS reporting. And the four resources that we have screenshotted and placed on this slide are particularly helpful in Fall 1. In fact, so helpful that they have been dubbed the Fall 1 Reporting Survival Kit. The CalPADS user manual is on the top left-hand side of this slide here. The user manual contains all essential information for CalPADS users to make full use of the system. It includes a description of the system functions and capabilities, contingencies and alternate modes of operation, and step-by-step procedures for system access and use. It also serves as a gateway to additional state compliance resources, submission, and report analysis tools. And kind of highlighted through this screenshot, we've pointed out that if you go to functionality map and the ribbon at the top of the slide here, and then online maintenance, student maintenance, you can find the detailed pages for each of the file types that we submit in CalPADS for students, including the student profile records submitted in Fall 1. So we have the SSID enrollment or SENR details here, the student information or SINF details here, student programs or SPRG details here, student English language acquisition status, and then below that, the slide is a little out of date. We have the old special education file types listed in the screenshot here, but the user manual has been updated and now has the four special education file types with the SWDS, meet plan, and SERV that all have detailed pages in this menu here. So that's the CalPADS user manual. I would also note that at the homepage of the CalPADS user manual, there's a Fall 1 reporting roadmap with a lot of the information that we'll cover today. Next, we have the CDE webpage for CalPADS system documentation, and this contains several essential guidance documents for Fall 1 reporting and beyond. It contains the CalPADS code sets. This screenshot is also a little out of date. It shows the code sets version 13.0. We are currently on version 16.0, so as you're submitting data for the 24 to 25 academic year, please do ensure that you're using codes from the version 16.0 code sets. The code sets contains the current coded values in CalPADS for fields with coded value data elements. The CDE webpage for CalPADS system documentation also contains the CalPADS file specifications, or CFS, in both Word and Excel forms. The file specifications provide data submission requirements at the individual field or file specification level, as well as information on CalPADS file processing methods. The CDE webpage for CalPADS system documentation now contains a link to the error list. There used to be a standalone Excel spreadsheet that was downloaded from the CalPADS system documentation page, but the error list is now contained in the CalPADS user manual, and the user manual link to the error list is contained in the CalPADS system documentation page. The error list contains descriptions and suggested resolutions for each error generated when managing data in CalPADS. And then the CalPADS system documentation page also contains the valid code combinations document, which lists codes that can only be used in specific combinations with other fields or other data elements as enforced by validation errors. So that's the CDE webpage for CalPADS system documentation. Below that, on the bottom right-hand side of the slide, we have the CSIS YouTube training channel. The CSIS YouTube training channel contains recordings of all of our training content, including the orientation, basics, data population, reporting and certification, and advanced courses, as well as more specific topics. It contains demonstrations of the resolutions of the most common errors in CalPADS. Again, it contains a page for each of the file types submitted in, or a video for each of the file types submitted in CalPADS. There are quite a few helpful videos on the CSIS YouTube training channel. But next to that, on the bottom left-hand side, we have the CSIS website. The CSIS website contains a drop-down menu for CalPADS. from which you're able to access Bridge, our learning management system, which is the avenue to get to our live trainings. Since we're all in the live training session today, I'll assume that we're all able to access Bridge. And then for helpful guidance resources, including training PowerPoints, there is this resources page here. I don't believe we have this PowerPoint up on the resources page yet, but it should get up there very soon here. So that is the Fall 1 Data Reporting Survival Kit. Let's go ahead and move now to discuss file key details, with a general discussion highlighting the background and key details for each file type that we submit in Fall 1. And we'll begin with the SSID enrollment, or the SENR file type. There are training videos on the CSIS YouTube training channel which cover each of these file types in depth, and the video for each individual file type is about 1 hour long. What we'll present today is a very condensed version. So for clarification and further information, please do take a look at the extended discussions of each file type on the CSIS YouTube training channel. Okay, so let's get started by covering some key points about the SENR file type. The SSID enrollment, or SENR file, is needed to first gain ownership of student records, which allows you to submit subsequent records for the student in CALPADS. The duration of LEA ownership of student records is from the enrollment start date to the enrollment exit date at your LEA in the student's SENR record. And again, this ownership is required to report any subsequent records in CALPADS, and the ownership is established with the SENR record. The SENR is also used to determine cohort inclusion for secondary students for the adjusted cohort graduation rate, or ACGR, and cumulative enrollment in end of year 3. The SENR establishes a district of geographic residence, transfer reasons, and enrollment statuses, whether primary, secondary, short-term, or one of the less typical enrollment statuses. SENR exits, and in particular exit reason codes, determine graduation, dropouts, and completers, and can be used to denote returning, transferring, and matriculating students. And some example exit reasons include E155, year-end enrollment exit, expected enrollment in the same school next academic year. T160 indicates a transfer to another California public school. E230 is a completer exit, and so on. There are several codes in the CALPADS code sets document for values in the student exit reason code field in the SENR record. And SENR exits indicate post-secondary transition from middle to high school, graduation, and program completion. We have mentioned ownership a couple of times now, and it is a very important concept in CALPADS. So let's take this slide to address ownership in detail here. So what is ownership? So ownership dictates who has the ability to maintain student data. Ownership of an SSID allows the LEA to submit and update records related to a student's profile during the enrollment period. The SENR start and end dates determine the period of ownership of student records in CALPADS. To add, update, or delete student information, LEAs must have ownership of the student record. And if you get a GER5 error, that's a GERR0005 error, you do not have ownership of the student records, meaning that the student isn't enrolled at your LEA during the period reported. And you should always check the SENR record start and end dates at your LEA, as well as the reporting LEA and school of attendance fields if you get a GER5 error. The GER5 error does not trigger on the SENR record, but it triggers on most, if not all, file types that you submit after the SENR record. So it is important to know to look to the SENR record, even though this isn't the record that triggered the error when you get the GER5. I love that comment, Beth. It's the GER5. Okay, let's go ahead and move on to the student information, or SINF record. And the SINF record is required for all students. In fact, when you submit an SENR record for the first time for a student, a shell SINF record is created in CALPADS, which you have to be sure to update. The SINF file contains demographic and address information about your student, and it's used for the purposes listed on this slide. SINF records are used to indicate race or ethnicity, legal and preferred names, gender and gender changes, address history, direct certification matching at the state level. It's used to identify students who are Title III eligible immigrants and to include students in the socioeconomically disadvantaged subgroup. So one more question for you guys, if you're able to indulge me here and put your answers in chat. Why are students' information records important, and how are they used both inside and outside of CALPADS? I know that's 3 questions. Why are they important? How are they used inside of CALPADS, and how are they used outside of CALPADS? Go ahead and answer any one of those questions. Maybe a little more weight on the why they're important. So why are SINF records important, and how are they used? Oh, there we go. Getting some answers. PBT matching, important for accurate representation. Verify the student SSID. That's a very good use of the demographic information there. Thank you guys. Thank you for indulging me this early on a Thursday here. All right, so this is our explanation of how it's used inside and outside of CalPads, and we're hoping that these uses themselves will kind of highlight the importance of SINF records. So within CalPads, SINF records are used to identify students in certain subgroup categories. For example, socioeconomically disadvantaged, Title III eligible immigrant, and non-traditional gender. Non-traditional gender is a designation for CTE participants and completers. And then outside of CalPads, the SINF records are used for state-level matching with direct certification of foster youth. And we did get matching from Diane in chat here. And for accountability purposes with oversight agencies and with the CDE. All right, that does conclude our discussion of the SINF record. Let's go ahead and move on to discuss the student programs or SPRG record. In Fall 1, the SPRG file type identifies students who are eligible for and or participating in California state or federal programs. Fall 1 eligibility program records are used again to identify eligibility in state or federal programs. Report English learner instructional strategies, and this is done in language instruction program or LIP SPRG records. And LIP records use program codes 300 to 307. And the eligibility program records are used to help include students in socioeconomically disadvantaged subgroups. This slide lists all of the program codes that are collected throughout the year. And some programs are collected in Fall 1, while others are collected in end of year. You're both able and encouraged to submit your program records on an ongoing basis throughout the year, as it's important to report and update students' eligibility or participation in CalPads as soon as that information is available. Identifying the various program eligibility and participation allows for students to receive additional services. However, if you do this kind of ongoing update of program records or ongoing submission of program records, not all program records will show up on your Fall 1 reports. The orange table here on the left-hand side of the slide contains the SPRG records that are formally collected in Fall 1 and will thus show up on your Fall 1 reports. So for example, free or reduced price meal program records or FRPM records using codes 181 and 182, gifted and talented education or GATE programs using code 127, homeless students with program code 191, and tribal foster youth with program code 193 will all appear or are all expected to appear on your Fall 1 reports. And this is in addition to the various language instruction program or LIP codes. Other programs that students may be participating in will not show up until you see them in your end of year reports, even if the data is submitted now. And this includes Title I Part A programs, armed forces, pregnant or parenting, and so on, as listed on the slide here. You may notice that the homeless program using code 191 appears in both Fall 1 and in end of year, and meaning this information will be contained in reports in both data collection periods. Okay, CalPads will automatically designate an SPRG record as either an eligibility or a participation record. Eligibility records indicate that the student has met the criteria to receive services for an educational program, but may or may not be receiving those services related to the program. Participation indicates that a student is both eligible for a program and receiving services associated with that program. The eligibility programs listed in the left-hand column of the table on the slide include homeless, 504, armed forces, pregnant or parenting, Title I Part C, GATE, and tribal foster youth programs. The participation programs on the right-hand side of the table include Title I Part A, the Opportunity Program, and the California Partnership Academy. In general, participation program data will show up on end of year reports, but some of the data does make its way onto Fall 1 reports, and that includes the Title I Part C program. As you're submitting files and student data to CALPADS, that information is used to identify students who are eligible for LCFF funding and will thus show up on reports 1.17 and 1.18. Students will appear on these LCFF reports if they're reported as homeless, migrant ed, foster youth, and tribal foster youth in SPRG records with start dates that are on or before Census Day. So, for example, Census Day this year is October 2nd. If a student is reported as homeless on October 3rd, they will not be included. If a student is reported homeless on October 1st, they will be included. NSLP and direct certification are the only two LCFF relevant programs that do not use Census Day as the cutoff point for inclusion in LCFF reports. And the two exceptions to Census Day as the cutoff date, again, are the National School Lunch Program, or NSLP, and direct certification. So let's go over the cutoff dates for those two exceptional programs. The NSLP program start date needs to be on or before October 31st to be included in these reports. And the applications must be received and date stamped on or before October 31st, regardless of whether the application was approved on or after October 31st. So as long as the NSLP applications were received and date stamped, even if they have not yet been processed and approved, if they were received and date stamped on or before October 31st, they will be included in the LCFF calculations and in report 1.17 and 1.18. And then with regards to direct certification matching happens at the state level. There's also direct certification that happens at the local level. And with regards to direct certification, students must be certified between July 2nd and November 2nd of the current year. So those are the two kind of exceptional programs here with the NSLP program and direct certification. The other programs, homeless, migrant ed, foster youth, and tribal foster youth, all use Census Day as the cutoff point for inclusion in these LCFF reports. And that concludes our discussion of the SPRG file type. Let's go ahead and move on now to discuss the Student English Language Acquisition, or SELA file type. The SELA file type identifies the student English language acquisition status for all students, not just for English learners. And it does this in order to determine assessments, funding, and English learner services necessary. SELA records identify eligibility for the LPAC, English language acquisition status, whether TBD, English only, IFEP, EL, RFEP, or ADEL, along with the initial status date. And SELA records are used to include students, again, in the socioeconomically disadvantaged subgroups for the LCFF. When performing CALPADS work in the SELA record, you'll want to ensure that you have all of the information on this slide from your English Learner Services department. And this includes the English language acquisition status, the primary language, the status start date, and the correction code if applicable. And we recommend reaching out and letting your English Learner Services staff know what you'll need now if you have not already. The correction reason codes are particularly noteworthy. There's a specific sequence to changes in English language acquisition statuses, as well as certain scenarios in which statuses can be changed out of sequence. If you're changing a status out of sequence, you'll need to use the appropriate correction reason code. The correction reason code can only be submitted in online maintenance and should be submitted with reference to the when to report a CELA correction reason code page in the CALPADS user manual. And we will go over the appropriate uses of CELA correction codes in a few slides here. This slide contains the different English language acquisition status codes that can be submitted for a student. And all students in grades TK through 12 must have an ELAS code reported in CALPADS. Students whose only language reported on the home language survey is English or American Sign Language are reported with an ELAS of EO. Students with a primary language other than English or American Sign Language are reported as TBD until the LEA has completed the LPAC assessment process, the initial LPAC assessment process. Students can only be TBD for 30 days upon initial enrollment. The IFEP and EL statuses are the results of initial LPAC testing. If the student shows English proficiency on the initial LPAC, they will be given an IFEP status. And if the LPAC indicates a lack of clearly defined English language skills, they'll have an EL status. After some time, EL students may take the summative LPAC. If the summative LPAC results indicate that the student is English proficient, the student will be reclassified as RFEP. And the ADEL status is reserved for students in grades kindergarten through 12 who are age 22 years or older and who are identified as foreign language speakers, but are not eligible to take the LPAC due to age restrictions. And it may be becoming clear here that there are progressions from certain ELAS codes to certain others. So let's go ahead and make that progression as clear as possible here. This chart shows the logical sequence of ELAS codes or ELAS statuses. The first step for an LEA to take regarding the ELAS is to distribute and collect the home language survey to student parents. If the home language survey indicates that English or American Sign Language is the sole language spoken at home, the student will be given an ELAS of EO. If the home language survey indicates a primary language other than English or American Sign Language, the student will be given an ELAS of TBD until they're given the initial LPAC assessment. Students may only remain in TBD status for 30 days. If a student is TBD and takes the initial LPAC, the results will place them in one of two statuses. If the initial LPAC indicates the student is English proficient, the student will be placed in IFEP status. If the initial LPAC indicates a lack of clearly defined English language skills, the student will be placed in EL status. If a K through 12 student with an ELAS of EL becomes 22 years or older, they will be placed in ADEL status. If a student with an ELAS of EL is tested with the summative LPAC and the results of the summative LPAC indicate English proficiency, the student will be placed in RFEP status. The arrows on the slide show the logical progression of the different ELAS statuses. If a change is being made to a student's ELAS that is not represented by an arrow on this slide, it is not a logical sequence, and a correction reason code must be used. This is the valid use of ELAS correction reason codes table, which you can also find in the CALPADS user manual, and it provides the scenarios where correction reason codes are appropriate. Correction code 1, evidence of non-English primary language, should only be used for transitions from EO to TBD. And so it is only included in one row on this table and only includes one valid transition from EO to TBD. Correction reason code 4, ineligible student tested, should only be used for transitions from EL or IFEP to EO. And so we see correction reason code 4 in the second row and in the fourth row. They're both defined the same, ineligible student tested, but in the second row, we have a transition from EL to EO, and in the fourth row, we have a transition from IFEP to EO. Both IFEP and EL are the results of LPAC testing, and correction reason code 4 says the student was not eligible for LPAC testing. And so they would go from these statuses that are the results of the LPAC right back to EO, which is a result of the home language survey. Correction reason code 5, evidence of EL or IFEP should be used to transition between the EL and IFEP statuses. So we have in row 3, correction reason code 5 is used to transition from EL to IFEP, and in row 5, correction reason code 5 is used to transition from IFEP to EL. So evidence of EL or IFEP is the definition, and so this is used to transition between the two statuses. These correction reason codes are only applicable when the prior status being corrected has a date on or after July 1st, 2018. Corrections must be done in online maintenance and must be done before a student takes the summative LPAC test. So those are the correction reason codes. There have been some changes to the code sets which affect the CELA records this year. So let's go ahead and discuss some new and updated codes in the 2024 to 25 school year. In order to LPAC test students with a primary language that is sign language, but is not American Sign Language, CALPADS needs to distinguish between American Sign Language and other sign languages. So in this effort, the ASE language code has been added to indicate American Sign Language. The definition for the existing SGN language code has been modified to indicate any sign language other than American Sign Language. So in home language surveys, if parents respond with the primary language of American Sign Language or ASL, you would use code ASE. For all other sign languages that are returned on the home language survey, use language code SGN. And this will ensure that students who speak a sign language other than ASL will be sent to TOMS for LPAC testing. There is one further, about a change as much as an announcement here, or much as a communication with Flash 185, which does have impacts on LPAC testing and on the CELA record. Flash 285 was released on August 8th with updated guidance on TK LPAC testing. The Flash states that the requirement to test students with the initial LPAC within 30 days of enrollment does not apply to TK students. LEA should continue to submit the CELA file and populate the ELAS status as TBD if the home language survey indicates a primary language other than English or American Sign Language. The TBD status will remain with the student until they are tested with the initial LPAC when enrolled in KN. CALPADS is no longer sending TK enrollment records to TOMS, and TK students will not show up in TOMS as eligible for LPAC testing. There have been quite a few LEAs who have misenrolled TK students into KN, only to make the correction later on. However, at the later time, the student has been sent to TOMS for LPAC testing. So if you inadvertently misenrolled a student in KN who should have been in TK, there has been a further Flash release, Flash 286, with guidance on how to resolve that scenario as well. So there are two Flashes now related to TK students in the LPAC with Flash 285 and 286. But 286 really comes with guidance on what to do if you inadvertently misenrolled a TK student in KN and they were sent to TOMS for LPAC testing. Okay, that concludes the changes and discussion in the CELA record. Let's go ahead and move now to the special education record types that we collect in Fall 1. And the 4 special education record types that we collect in Fall 1 include the meetings or MEET file type, which is used to capture the dates that specific types of statutory meetings were held. The MEET file is used to monitor the timeliness of these statutory meetings. It also includes the Students with Disability Status or SWDS file type, which is used to determine a student's eligibility for and participation in the special education program. Also included in the special education file types is the plan file, which is used to identify the specific plan and settings that a student is on at any given time. And then finally, we have the services or SERV file type, formerly the SSRV file. And this is used to report services for children and students ages 0 to 22 who are eligible and participating in the special education program and have active plans or will have active plans during the reporting year. So here's a little bit more detail on each of those file types. The meetings file is intended to capture the dates that specific types of statutory meetings were held, and these meetings include initial evaluations, annual plan reviews, eligibility reevaluations, and pending meetings. And the meet file is used to monitor the timeliness of these meetings. The Students with Disabilities Status file, or the SWDS file, is intended to determine a student's eligibility for and participation in the special education program at any given time. And this is in line with IDEA reporting, DataQuest, and the California School Dashboard. The third file in the list here is the plan file. The plan file is intended to identify the specific plan and settings that a student is on at any given time. This is again intended for IDEA reporting, and it allows the LEA to submit any plan changes with specific start and end dates independent of meetings. And this was an improvement that occurred with the special education redesign. The plan start and end dates formerly with the SPED and SSRV files needed to be tied to a meeting date. Plans and meetings have been decoupled with regards to the dates here. So LEAs are now able to submit plan changes with specific start and end dates that are independent of meetings. So there was a little bit of a change in the thinking that goes behind this reporting with that change in the special education redesign. Finally, we have the services, or the SERV file type, and this is intended to report services for children and students ages 0 to 22 who are eligible and participating in the special education program and have active plans or will have active plans during the reporting year. These 4 special education file types are not submitted directly to CALPADS with either online maintenance or batch file upload. Rather, special education data is entered into the local special education data system, the local SEDS, and transferred directly to CALPADS from the SEDS via the Application Programming Interface, or API. The API is what allows this automated interaction between the local SEDS and CALPADS, which allows for faster processing of students with disabilities records. The local SED system will provide a report after each instance of the nightly process with information on rejected records. And guidance from both CSIS and the CDE is to make changes to special education data in the SED system rather than in CALPADS. And this is in order to mitigate against discrepancies between the two systems and to mitigate against the triggering of potential errors. There is a legal component to special education reporting, and discrepancies between the two systems could result in litigation. And so to mitigate against this, we always recommend that you do updates to special education data in the SED system and let this API handle the consistency between CALPADS and the SEDS. All right, we also have some updated codes for special education reporting in the 24 to 25 academic year. So let's get into discussing changes that are relevant to special education file types. After discussions at the CDE in August of 2023, it was determined that changes were needed to make the distinction between revocation and cessation of services without revocation for the non-participation reason codes, the special education non-participation reason codes. So special education non-participation reason code 28 is named not eligible, written revocation, and is defined as, after a period of being eligible and participating in special education, the parent, guardian, or student, if 18 or older, has provided written revocation of consent for special education instruction and services. And this last sentence is probably the most important in distinguishing between these two codes. The student is no longer eligible for special education and services. Code 29 is named eligible cessation of services without revocation, and code 29 is defined as the parent, guardian, or student, if 18 years or older, has voluntarily elected to cease special education instruction and services, but has not provided written revocation of consent for special education instruction and services. And here too, the last sentence is probably the most valuable in distinguishing the two codes from each other. The student is eligible, but not participating at this time. So if the student or if the parent or guardian of the student or the student themselves, if they're 18 or older, if they have provided a written revocation for consent of services, they are no longer eligible for the special education program. So their status in the SWDS record would be not eligible. If using code 29, they have not provided that written revocation, which means they are eligible, but they have just ceased receiving services. So the status in the SWDS record, if you're using code 29, would be eligible, not participating. So that's the distinction between codes 28 and 29, special education non-participation reason codes 28 and 29. There are further changes to codes that affect special education records. And in particular, there have been updates to special education non-participation reason codes 11 and 12. Discussions with LEAs who use SACE, as well as with the SACE vendor themselves, have indicated a need to modify special education non-participation reason type codes 11 and 12 to provide clarity and to limit confusion between the two codes. Both code 11 and code 12 indicate eligibility with no education plan, and so the two are often confused. Code 11 is eligible, no education plan, and then in parentheses, parent declined FAPE or services. And the added context and clarity is evident from a look at the old and new definitions, or from an analysis of the old and new definitions. The highlighted sentence in code 11 probably adds the most weight in distinguishing between the two codes. Code 11 should be used when the parent or guardian has declined both the offer of FAPE and, if parentally placed in a private school, a proportionate share of services that could be provided with an ISP. The majority of students will not be parentally placed in a private school, and so Code 11 should be used in the majority of cases if the parent declined the offer of FAPE wholesale. So that's Code 11. Okay. Code 12 is eligible, no education plan, and then in parentheses, other reasons. And the added context and clarification here might also be evident from an analysis of the old and new definitions. Code 12 should be used when students are eligible with no education plan for any reason other than the parent declining FAPE wholesale. The example provided in the definition here is the student will begin services on a later date, for example, the first day of school in the new academic year. Confusingly, this definition also includes the example of a parent consenting to initial provision of services, but not immediately to the offer of FAPE. This means that you should use code 12 if the parent didn't decline FAPE, but hasn't accepted it yet, causing no services to be provided. So that's codes 11 and 12. I hope that was clear. If you do have questions about codes 11 and 12, please do place those questions in chat. And then one final change to special education reporting is a update to the user interface. And it's an update to the special education containers that you see on the student details page in CALPADS. The special education and SSRV containers, the SPED and SSRV containers in the UI have been modified to archive read only, and the old SPED and SSRV ODS downloads have been disabled. This means that these containers will only show historical records, and the old SPED reports are no longer viewable. This is due to the special education redesign last academic year, which replaced these two file types with the new SWDS Meet Plan and SERV special education files. All right, and that does conclude our discussion of the special education reporting, which concludes our discussion of the file types or the key details from the file types that we submit in Fall 1.